very excited about the fact that rather than being bombarded with messages on products and services, or even political messages that don't necessarily resonate with you or aren't relevant to you as an individual, you can start to receive advertising and communications that are more relevant to your lifestyle, your economic means, your ideology, and so forth.
So, Alexander, thank you so much for joining me for this discussion about how the digital world is changing everything. I wonder if we could start off by you telling us a bit about what Cambridge Analytica does.
Certainly. Thank you, Dido. So we're a data-driven marketing and communications agency, which really means that we're trying to use data and predictive analytics to identify and target audiences such that we can start to serve more personalized content to the people we're trying to engage.
So a quick Google search will flag up that you've used those skills and techniques a lot in the political arena around the world. What is it that you're doing with data analytics that's driving the effectiveness of various political campaigns?
Well, it's actually a great shame that we consider ourselves a technology firm that happens to apply its technologies and methodologies in a number of theatres, including politics and defence and government space, but principally in the brand and commercial space. But certainly politics is what we've received most press for in the last 6 or 12 months because of the elections that we've been involved with. To answer your question, in the political sphere, what we try and do is use data to understand what messages are most important to individual constituents, to individual voters, such that we can align the politicians' policy and ideological standpoint with the voters so that they can be well informed about what position the candidates are taking, and therefore have enough information to make up their minds about who they want to vote for.
Can you give us a sense of the scale of personalisation? Say in a campaign that you've been involved in, what proportion of the population might you be directly, specifically communicating with, as opposed to sending a generic message to?
Well, it actually depends very much on the legislative framework of the countries that you're working in. So different countries are more or less permissive in their data legislation. Countries such as the UK is what's known as an opt-in data environment. So people have to give their consent for their data to be used for these types of programs. America is an opt-out, so people have to obviously contact you and say that they don't want their data used. So in a country such as America, we're able to target all adults, some 230 million adults, voters or registered voters across the country, and to be able to start to engage them with specific messages within the campaign.
So just for those of us that are not so technically literate, that means that for every single citizen in the US, you've amassed a raft of data and specifically targeted a unique message to them.
Well, the idea is to try and look at what data there is available on all the adults across a certain country, and then to look at correlations in that data such that you can begin to cluster people. People who have similar attitudes or lifestyles or geographies or demographics to each other, so that you can begin to serve different clusters of people with different messages that are going to be most relevant to them.
And why is it that it seems to be the outsiders, the non-mainstream political candidates that have been so quick to adopt these sorts of techniques?
I'm not sure that's true, actually. I mean, if you look in America, it was originally the Democrats who started to explore the use of digital and then big data and analytics. Clearly, we were working very closely with the RNC, the Republican National Committee, which is obviously a main political body. I think a lot of political parties are beginning to invest in these technologies. Certainly in more established political parties, you do see legacy methodologies being embraced by people who maybe have been entrenched in the system and are still fighting yesterday's campaign, and therefore maybe are a little bit less willing to explore new technologies. Maybe in smaller fringe parties, they're a bit more dynamic than the larger ones. That's probably the
same in business, effectively. Often it is the new entrants or the challengers, like the business that I ran, that is willing to try new things.
Exactly that.
Okay. So you see the same phenomenon in the UK as well, or not?
I think that I think in the UK we're seeing, I mean, certainly both in the last general election, both Labour and the Conservatives and other political parties started to invest quite heavily and embrace these technologies. So I don't think you could say that it's been confined to more fringe parties, maybe such as UKIP, which received a lot of press for its use of data and digital.
Yeah, I was thinking less, maybe it's my mischoice of words, less fringe parties and more non-mainstream candidates. When Barack Obama first started campaigning and using, he's probably the first globally recognised politician to be using digital as a platform, wasn't he? And he was not a mainstream expected winner in the Democratic primaries initially, was he?
Indeed, but I think you've got to look at maybe not look at the candidates, you've really got to look at what's happening outside of politics. Silicon Valley was for the first time beginning to develop technologies and embrace these technologies that really weren't possible to implement before about 2008 and certainly 2012. The idea of using data in such a granular way simply wasn't possible. We didn't have that capability that we do today. So these are still quite new. There's going to be a first mover advantage. Clearly, the United States, which is developing a lot of these tech, is going to have the edge there. But now we're seeing a lot of European countries embracing these sorts of technologies across the commercial space and, of course, entering the political space as well.
So is there anything that you can do that you shouldn't?
Well, I'd like to think not. I mean, obviously, technology has, has limitless bounds in some sense, but we're all bound by some moral code and ethical code and fair business practice, and the same applies to politics. So, anyone can bend the laws or break the rules, but that isn't really a reflection of technology. That's a reflection of the individuals.
I was more thinking, is there anything that the technology is enabling possible that as a society we shouldn't allow? So, for example, in, I think it was 1957, subliminal advertising was banned. Is there anything akin to that in the data analytics techniques that you see developing that we should be thinking about regulating?
Well, I think at this particular juncture, I see it as a very positive evolution. I'm very excited about the fact that rather than being bombarded with messages on products and services or even political messages that don't necessarily resonate with you or aren't relevant to you as an individual, you can start to receive advertising and communications that are more relevant to your lifestyle, your economic means, your ideology and so forth. So I think that is positive. It's positive for the consumers or the voters. They get a better more targeted experience. It's clearly better for the brands or the political parties because they get a return on investment is improved. But I think obviously you have to be careful that it doesn't become intrusive. At the moment, the data that's being used is fairly benign. Companies like ours are modeling consumer and lifestyle and transaction data. What cars you drive, what magazines you read. This is not necessarily the sort of data that most people would feel made them vulnerable or left them exposed in some sort of way. I think as long as that line is maintained and we're not talking about financial data or sensitive personal data or health data or anything else that people might find intrusive, then most people would agree that the benefits outweigh the risks.